Good morning to all of you who joined at the webinar for today, the European Data Spaces for Public Administration and the role of data.europa.eu. My name is Gianfranco. I will be your host for today. I will introduce myself in a second, but let's start from some house cleaning, let's say, from the rules of the game for today. The webinar will be recorded, so please be aware as you open your microphone or show your video. This will be used for research purposes within the team. You are invited to mute yourself as the guests and the host will be talking today. Please reserve about 3 minutes after we finished to share with us your feedback from the webinar so that we can improve our offering of services and support from the Academy. And finally, for questions, use the chat that you see in the bottom right corner of the screen. As I will explain better in a second, this is actually a research platform for us. It's not simply a dissemination tool, this specific webinar. So it's very, very important for us that you share with us your feedback, your curiosity, your challenges. The agenda for today is what you see on screen. We will go first through the concept of data spaces from a European Commission perspective, the difference with the portals, what the policy landscape is and the requirements for the data spaces. We will go then with Mark Christopher from DG Grow. The first session will be by Maria Rosario Cuduti of DG Connect. We will get to the guests in a second. The second session will be on the state of play of public procurement, specifically with regard to data space as a platform for sharing the data with Mark. The third session will be with Marta Pont from the Data Spaces Support Center on what the role of that project is in supporting the EU-funded data spaces. And we will reserve as much time as possible up to about 12:30 for some panel discussion and questions from yourselves. So, but who are we in the room today? So in my case, Gianfranco, I'm I would say a veteran of the open data and data sharing program in the European Union. I work for Capgemini Invent, but I have been supporting the Commission for the last 5 years, I believe, in many different roles. I led data.europa.eu in the past for the Publications Office. I led the Data Spaces Support, the Data Support Center for Data Sharing, that is the predecessor project for the support to data sharing program in the Commission. And now I'm part of Data Space Support Center as well, advising Europe and other international governments on open data and data sharing. But with us today are, starting from left to right on screen, Maria Rosaria Cuduti. She works for DG Connect. That is the Director General for Communication Networks, Content and Technology. She will tell us more about the perspective of the Commission on data spaces and how they were created and why. Mark Christopher Schmidt is from DG Grow, the Director General for Internal Market Industry, Entrepreneurship and subject matter expertise. That is, small and medium enterprises. SME always confuses me. That's the directory that is more focused on the element of procurement and how data sharing around procurement is relevant to this context. Marta Pont is actually a colleague from Capgemini, but working specifically on Data Space Support Center. She represents the SSC in this room, and she will be able to tell us more of what the role for that project specifically is in respect to the many data spaces that Europe is promoting, funding, and developing. So remember, put your question in chat. Don't be shy. This is really an opportunity for us to learn. We need to understand what the potential of European data spaces is for the economy and the future for citizens and business in Europe. Data.europa.eu, you probably know well. This is an invitation-only event, so we know you in a way. We know that it is relevant to you. And it is so important that in the many different ways by which Europe is supporting the development of the data program across its many flavors, from open to data sharing, that we integrate and relate in the best way possible the various projects and programs that contribute to this picture. Working inside the machine, let's say, sometimes our perspective can be a bit biased. That is why it's so important that we extend data understanding to you, and we need you really to share. I hope you will help us in achieving this today, and I will go straight into Maria Rosaria Scudotti's presentation on the concept of data spaces, the differences with data portals, policy landscape, and requirements of data spaces. Maria Rosaria, please take it for our audience, and if you need to change slide, just tell me, and I will be happy to support you.
Perfect. So I will start right away because I already made you waste some precious minutes. So indeed, I'm going to talk about the foundations of the actions that we are doing at DG Connect in the Commission for really building the data economy and for building the European way of handling data. And that's really what we think can make a difference, can make of Europe a global leader when it comes to data governance, data sharing, access and use for the benefit of the society, of the economy, and given the world we live in, also for the environment. Next slide, please. So the foundation is really the data strategy that we published in February 2020. So at the very beginning of this commission mandate, when we really got also instructions for our commissioner, for the president itself, to really work on making sure that the digital transition in Europe happens according to the European values and principles. So we, in the data strategy, we set out the vision of creating a single market for data, where data can flow across borders, across sectors, and we put at disposition of companies and public sector and citizens only quality data, and the rules that already exist on data sharing and protection of privacy, protection of competition are already have to be respected, as well as the European values and principles. We announced in the data strategy different kinds of instruments to achieve this goal. Policy measures, funding measures, legislative measures. And this, it's very important to point out that all these actions go in the end. They really count for creating a single European market for data. And this cross-sectoral legislative framework that we are building with all the new legislative proposals according to the data strategy will play a key role in the developing of the common European data spaces. Because how we can achieve the single market for data? First, we have to make sure that in all the sectors of the economy, data sharing, access and use is boosted, happens more. All these different instruments at the end will find implementation in the common European data spaces. When all the common European data spaces will be up and running, they will also be able to, as we always say, to talk to each other, in the sense that we have to ensure interoperability between the sectors, between the data spaces, so that data can really flow across all the different sectors, and the European market for data can be fully deployed and operational. Next slide, please. So the very first important legislative instrument under the data strategy is the Data Governance Act, that lays down an horizontal framework for making sure to boost voluntary data sharing according to certain mechanisms. We are talking here about the data intermediaries that have to be neutral and trusted. And we really count on these entities to boost data sharing, because they will provide trusted services to data holder and data user. They will put them in contact. They will make sure the data sharing happens in a way that respects the right of all the parties involved. We are creating the foundations for data altruism mechanism in Europe, so that individuals and companies that want to make their data available for the common good, let's think about research in various domains, but also combating, the climate change, they can do that and make sure that their data will not be misused. But with the Data Governance Act, we also want to make even more data in the hands of the public sector available for use. We know that we have already a very good and solid open data policy in the European Union, but with the Data Governance Act, we make sure that also those specific categories of data that are in the hands of the public sector body but are sensitive because they are related to the right of someone else, because we are talking about maybe confidential data, sensitive data, the public sector body, by setting up specific, mechanisms and data sharing environments, they are able to make all this data available as well. And then, of course, we also proposed to create a body, an advisory body to the Commission, the European Data Innovation Board, that will make sure that the Data Governance Act is implemented in a coherent way across the member states, will help member states in creating also best practices for how to boost data altruism, how to promote data intermediation services, and also will make sure that if there are gaps in data standards on interoperability issues that need to be filled in to ensure interoperability between the sectors and so between data spaces, the Commission will know how to best act on those gaps that needs to be filled. So the European Data Innovation Board will also have a critical role when it comes to development of the common European data spaces. And in the data strategy, we also highlight the European approach to international data flows that has to be open but also assertive, because we want to make sure that our companies benefits from the international market, but we have also to make sure that when European data travels abroad, the same level of security that is guaranteed to data in the European Union travels with the data, let's say. So we want to shield also non-personal data from unlawful access requests from third countries' government. Next slide, please. Then we have the Data Act proposal. So the Data Governance Act is already a regulation published in the official journal and will become applicable on the 24th of September this year. We are negotiating the Data Act, the second major legislative initiative under the data strategy. And this is really kind of revolutionary piece of legislation, because for the first time we are introducing new access and use rights on data that are aimed at empowered individuals, companies and SMEs that contribute to produce data, especially by using Internet of Things objects. So the Data Act looks at data sharing in different constellations. We have business to business, business to consumers, and also for the first time in European legislation, business to government, because we want to make sure that if an emergency happened, and we have still fresh memories of the COVID emergency, we want to make sure that when public sector needs to save lives, they have the data that they need to implement effective, efficient, and fast policies. But we also want, the Data Act is also an SME instrument, in the sense that we want to create a level playing field for the SMEs when they negotiate with big player data sharing arrangements. We want that have the same weight in the negotiation. So that's why we also tackle this issue in the Data Act. And we also boost competition in the cloud market services, and we also empower the user of cloud services to easily switch between one cloud service provider to another. Also, the Data Act looks at common European data spaces with an interoperability provision that mandates some specific requirements, technical specifications have to be adopted by all the data spaces, and also empowers the Commission to fill gaps that exist in terms of standards and interoperability. Next slide. But I also want to mention that last December, the implementing regulation on high-value datasets was adopted. This is another very important step in boosting the open data policy in Europe, because with this implementing act, we made open data of 6 categories available for free in machine-readable formats format through APIs. And so we can really see that the open data, the data in the hands of the public sector really plays a crucial role and can contribute to production of value in the data economy, to boost innovation in the data economy, and of course will also play an important role in all the data spaces. As you can see from these slides, these are the 10 data spaces that were announced in the data strategy. Today we have already some other data spaces, for example, tourism, cultural heritage, media, language technology is very important data space. We are also, the Commission is supporting also these additional data spaces, and we can easily grasp, looking also at the list of sectors and domain of public interest, that actually public sector have a say, have a role in all the data spaces. They have very important data that needs to be shared as well, and they can also benefit, of course, from data exchanges in all the data spaces. So it's really important that the public sector is very active in reach out to relevant communities, relevant stakeholders in all the sectors, in all the data spaces, because it's really a win-win game, in the sense that data spaces are really bottom-up. We favor a bottom-up approach, so it is community-based, stakeholder-based. They have to engage, they have to assess the issues, why data sharing is not happening in the sector, if this is the issue, and they have together try to solve the issue also by setting up the right governance for the data space, because, and that's very important, how we see the data space. It's a combination of governance, of data sharing, access and use, of technical infrastructures, and they complement each other, because if we only have the technical infrastructures but the stakeholders do not agree on how to make the data available, we can't use the technical infrastructures. So this is really the fundamental notion of the data spaces according to the Commission. Then of course we were not the first one to introduce data spaces. Data spaces were already there, data sharing was already happening. But with the data spaces, we try to really harmonize also how data governance in all the sectors has to be developed, in the sense that, of course, European legislation that already exists has to be respected by the stakeholders in all data spaces. The horizontal framework for data sharing, access and use that we are building with the Data Act, with the Data Governance Act, with Open Data Policy has to be respected, as well as all the legislation on competition and the European and also member state legislation that already exists. But the stakeholders in the data spaces can build on this basis that already exist to boost data sharing, access and use even more in all the data spaces. And the Commission is supporting the development of data spaces not only with legislative measures, with policy measures, but of course also with funding measures. And here we have to mention the Digital Europe program, that is really the cornerstone of the support of the Commission to the development of the data spaces. The second work program was adopted last March, and it reaffirmed the strong commitment from the Commission to support the development of the data spaces. Coordination and support actions are already ongoing in all the data spaces. We have an important tool also that stakeholders in data spaces can reach out, that is the Data Spaces Support Center, that became fully operational last October. It is also supported by the Digital Europe program, and has indeed the role of also making sure, provide the tools and create the knowledge as well for all the data spaces, so that they can develop in a coherent manner, let's say. We have already a number of deliverables from the Data Spaces Support Center. Please visit their website, because you can find all the information, and also the information to reach them out, because of course Public sector bodies, authorities, public sector stakeholders are also very welcome to contact the Data Spaces Support Center and to see how they can be better integrated in the work that is ongoing on the data spaces front. Next slide. Yes, one of the characteristics also of the data space, it is decentralized. Data space is not a data lake, is not a data catalog, is not a technical infrastructure that allows authorities to exchange data. That is not a data space. Why? Because the aim of the data space is to put stakeholders, different stakeholders together, private, public, small, big, and they, through new data exchanges, the data is also used for different purposes that it was originally collected. It is used by more stakeholders. That allows to create more value in the terms of new services, new products, better policy making, better public service delivery. So that's why we say it's not a data lake. If we think that a data space is just let's say a catalog and a place where all data is stored, that's not how we see the data space. Also because data does need to be moved. Let's say it's the query that goes to the data. So that's why we use this a bit fun image that the data space is not a data lake, but is more like a fish market. I think, yeah, let's move to the next slides, otherwise I run too much after out of time. This is just to summarize the support, how the Commission is supporting all the data spaces. So we have the legislative measures, we work with stakeholders, also through the Data Spaces Super Center. We will have the European Data Innovation Board up and running in September. We foresee already the first meeting in autumn. We have the funding that is supporting and will also support the technical deployment of all the data spaces. And the Commission is also working on, next slide please, on a technical solution. It is called Simple. It is an open source, will be, because it's still not there, an open source middleware software that will be made available to all the data spaces to increase interoperability. And it is a huge investment from the part of the Commission. The procurement is ongoing, and we aim at having it deployed in 2024. Next slide. Yeah, I already briefly mentioned Simple. Next slide.
If you allow me, Maria Rosaria, because
Yeah.
we actually have Marta in the room for the SSC,
Sure.
we may actually let her discuss the SSC when later, and I would take you straight into your invitation, perhaps to contact back DG Connect, and as you said earlier, perfectly well. If you see that the data space is missing, let us know. So this is not intended to be from the ivory tower of the Commission, you do this, you do that, you don't develop this sector, you develop this other one. The Commission has done this for the community of users, citizens, and if something is simply not in line with what your expectation, you simply can advocate for what you're missing. I have a few questions for you, Maria Rosaria, if you don't mind, also inspired from something I see in the chat, some question we got in the past when talking about data spaces. The first, probably the most natural one is the difference between the common European data space and the data spaces. I see that sometimes it's not clear. Can you tell us a little more?
Yeah, the common European data spaces are indeed the data spaces that were that the Commission is supporting also with the Digital Euro program. And where those were announced in the data strategy. And maybe the difference is, so first of all, the direct support in terms of funding of the Commission. The second is that the data governance in the common European data spaces has to be built according to European legislation, the horizontal framework we are creating, and the respect of European principles and value. So let's say there's no a private dimension in the sense that the stakeholders are totally free to do organize data sharing access and use as they want, but they have to respect the legislation that exists and that is being built at European level. Of course, there can be cooperation between the different initiatives. I think at the end of the day, the objective is to free data from silos. So if we can achieve that also by cooperating with initiatives that are already ongoing, that's welcome. I think that's, in short, that would be my reply.
Thank you. And it reminds me a lot, the common European data space reminds me a lot of the common European market. Probably the sound is intentional. There's this kind of connection we've achieved over many years, and with so much effort, the free circulation of goods. Why shouldn't we be able to achieve the free circulation of data in the full respect of the legal framework that is active in Europe and the value of the European
Indeed.
Union?
Indeed.
There's been a lot of talking about the EDIB, this mysterious entity that is coming. And by the way, I believe we should remind the audience that the applications are open for the
Yes.
Data Innovation Board since last week. And I believe someone told me that, I actually read it myself, that the EDIB is also named explicitly also in the provisional text of the Data Act, not only of the Data Governance Act. So it's going to be very important. Can you tell us a little more of what exactly the EDIB will be? Is it like an expert group? How many people are there? Is it just the government, entities, industry? How that will look like?
Yeah,
And what do you
sure.
expect from people applying, since perhaps we can invite some of the audience to apply?
Yeah, sure. So the European Data Innovation Board will be composed by more or less 40 members. The vast majority of these members will be the representatives from the member states' competent authorities on data intermediation services and data altruism that the DGA mandates the member state to set up. Then there will be some representative from the European Data Innovation Board, European Data Protection Supervisor as well, and the board. A representative from ENISA, that is the EU Agency for Cybersecurity. There will be a member from the network of SMEs. And then actually the call is for, this, as you can see, is all public sector members. So the call actually refers to the selection of members from the private sector. And in the selection criteria that you can find in the call, you can also grasp which kind of sectors will be representative in EDIB. The main function, so EDIB is formally an expert group, but is also something a bit different because it's also it will advise and assist the Commission in all the matters related to the Data Governance Act. Specifically, if you read Article 30 of the Data Governance Act, you really find an exhaustive list and detailed list of all the tasks of the European Data Innovation Board, advise and assist the Commission, provide guidelines on data and altruism, data intermediation services, on how to make sure that the public sector make the data available in the best way. So it's referring to Chapter 2 of the Data Governance Act. And then, of course, you have tasks related to ensure enhance interoperability across sectors, across borders, and across the data spaces. We aim at having the board set up by September. Of course, it also depends on the member states that have to nominate first the competent authorities, then the competent authorities will be asked to nominate a representative to the board. As sectors, as you can read in the call, we are thinking about having representation from the health sector, agriculture sector, mobility, energy, manufacturing, because these are really crucial ones. But then, of course, the board will work across on topics and issues that are across all sectors. The DGA also mentioned subgroups. that will assist the main board, but the work of the subgroups will be organized a little bit later when it will be clear where the board will start working on, because it's a very huge list of tasks, so they will have to also prioritize some of them at the beginning. You rightly mentioned that the European Data Innovation Board is also now also mentioned in the Data Act, in the text that is under negotiations. And actually, I forgot to give a little update on where we stand on the Data Act. We are preparing the third trialogue for the end of the month. And we are very much confident that we will be able to close with the co-legislators the negotiation phase, still under the Swedish presidency. And the fact that the Data Act has been a priority on the agendas of all the council presidencies also is a proof of the importance of this act, that really aims at enhancing fairness in the data economy and empowering the users and the small players. I don't know if I replied to all the questions on EDIP.
Yes, I would say extensively. I'm very, very interested in finding out actually more about the activity of the EDI, but we will have to wait for September for that. One last question from me before we go to Mark. You described how both the DGA, the Data Governance Act, and the Data Act are sort of a container. So the DGA has 4 significant pillars. I seem to remember that the Data Act is something like a dozen. There are many different parts in it, some with regards to government data, some with regards to private sector, some is altruistic data, some is about the obligation of publishing data in situation of emergency. There is a lot, right? And we need to help, I believe, I'm sure you agree with me, citizens in understanding where each of these boxes are. As much as let's say, the practitioners can feel comfortable with a continuum in which all data is about connected, legislation applies in different ways. You need to be able to understand what we're talking about each time. One question I got recently, for example, is what is the relationship between the high-value data sets of the Open Data Directive and the data space program? And I had to explain that it's not strictly a connection. The data spaces may have as an output open data, but high-value data sets are defined as a government open data specific. So there's a lot of complication in a way in keeping track of everything that is happening. Do you see data spaces be relevant to the viability of open data as well in this picture?
Yeah, no, yeah, sure. Actually, open data is by default part of any data space. And also the high value data sets, they also are in a way by default usable in all the data spaces, because indeed we are talking about open data that is already there and is available to be used, shared in all the data spaces. So that's something really important to highlight. That open data is the classical example of kind of data that plays a role in all the data spaces, because we have open data on relevant for all the sectors. And it is responsibility of the public sector to make sure that open data is used, is accessed. It's not something, so we don't see really the other stakeholders that have to go to the public authorities, to the public sector bodies, but it's the public sector bodies that have this data available that have to, in a way, advertise it in all the data spaces. That's why I was talking about engagement of stakeholders. That's bottom-up approach, because that's really important. The public sector can't wait that someone go to it and ask for the data. The open data is open data by definition and by default, and that has to be clear. Is one of the most important resources we have in Europe in the data economy to boost the creation of more value and benefit also for the citizens. So it is the responsibility of the public sector to make sure that they are engaged in all the data spaces and make the data that they have available.
Perfect. So open data for sure is an input into the work of data spaces. and possibly also as an output, because nobody will stop the organization participating in data sharing to choose the specific data sets that are not confidential, perhaps do not contain personal data, that can be licensed in the open back to the public. And possibly this is one of the use cases for Mark Christopher. This was actually an attempt as a link between the two. But Maria Rosario, thank you again. I will go into Mark describing one specific experience of a very, very young data space, although with a lot of history for other reasons that he will explain for sure. So what is the state of the public procurement data space, in short, the PPDS? Mark, take it away, and thank you again, Rosario.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So I will explain very briefly the public data space and the state of play. Due to the timing, I will not go into detail of all the slides. So if you go to the first one directly. So what it says is that every year 2 trillion euros are spent by public administration on public procurement procedures, which is roughly 14% of GDP. So the public administration have a huge buying power on the European market. And if you go to the next slide, we see that through the TED database, Tenders Electronic Daily, which needs to be published by the member states on TED, on the European, on the publications portal, we have only 20% of this information available. But the remaining 80% of the procurement notices are spread in the member states in various formats. So what we try to do with the public procurement data space, if you go to the next slide, is to actually harness the power of public procurement data. I like the word from Maria, where she used the word harness data. I think that is a very important aspect. We want to provide access to various user groups to the public procurement data space, to policymakers, to companies, to NGOs, academia, journalists, but also public buyers, service providers, or even citizens. So we will set up a public procurement data space where it is voluntary for the member states to share the data for below the procurement threshold. So they don't have to join, but they can join. And we try to support them in joining us. We see that there is a huge interest of the member states to join to the PPDS, to share the data. And what we currently do is we are already implementing the public procurement data space, and we actually have co-creation sessions with them on a more or less regular basis, where we gather knowledge from the various stakeholders, not only with policymakers, but we have there as well public buyers, because they have a different interest in the public procurement data space than policymakers. We have as well SMEs there, because they again have a different interest in how the PPDS could be useful for them. And the same is for NGOs, academia, and journalists. So if you go to the next slide, when it comes about the state of play, as I said already, we are already implementing the public procurement data space. We will have a very basic version ready already in autumn, where we are processing data from the Tenders Electronic Daily, from the publications office. We'll process some basic indicators, and we will focus in the next year to connect member states to the public procurement data space. We will improve then as well the usability of the PPDS, and we want to include as well historical data. We have, and I think that is very important, we have one of the advantages is that the publications office actually has developed, together with member states, the so-called e-procurement ontology. Because when we speak about sharing data, we have to think about how can we make this data accessible to the end users, and having a common format, a common understanding is very important. What we will do as well is in the future is to connect it to other databases within the scope of public procurement, but also outside of the scope of public procurement data. We see that public procurement touches upon health, climate. Yes, so sustainable procurement. It touches about using properly EU funds. It is about understanding collusion, etc. So we will have, of course, the interest to connect the data of the public procurement data space to other data sets to enrich the data that we can, how we can analyze the data. The next slide will show a very basic setup of the public procurement data space. So we will have data providers. One of them is the Publications Office with TED, but we will have also member states who will share the data. We perceive them as the data providers. And then we have on the other side the data users. Depending on their role and their access, they have data to more or less data. And because that is about how the link is between the open data portal from the European institutions and the PBDS, of course, the idea is that we make the data available also on the open data portal. One thing that we try to do a little bit different, currently we provide CSV files, so we provide open data on the data portal. We will continue to do this, maybe even in more formats. But what we like to do is we use RDF as the format within the public procurement data space. So the idea that we have is actually to provide on the data portal a SPARQL endpoint, so that from the open data portal, you can directly reach out to the data that is available within as open data to the public procurement data space. If you want to know more, if you go to the next slide, we already published in March a communication which explains the PBDS in greater detail. It was a communication from the Commission. And yes, so I'm looking forward for receiving questions, but I'm handing the floor back to you.
Thank you, Mark. And it's a great example, in my opinion, although you are still in the early stages, because it brings together a lot of, let's say, sharp corners that we need to understand to have a very good idea what data space is, because it is government hosted, let's say, organized, but with a lot of non-government data. For example, all the organizations that bid for a contract. It is made by a lot of publicly available data. For example, the fact that, I told you I work for Capgemini, the fact that we bid for some work is usually published back on by the European Commission. That you can see exactly who bid for a contract, but at the same time, some of the information is also considered commercially confidential, and you don't want to share it. It may depend on the country, it may depend on your own procurement rules and, let's say, code of conduct, whatever the procurement specific regulation and rules that the procurement office gives themselves. Some of this information may intentionally be published, some other may be intentionally protected. So a data space is perfect for that because it is intended to implement all of those mechanisms by which we can protect what's necessary, open what doesn't need protection, and control who sees what. As simple as that, right, in a way. There's something you say that about there being a data user, and perhaps the wording, let's say, triggered me a little. In reality, what you described is a very beautiful example of a federation of different data services. So today, for the ones who in the audience who don't know, data.europa.eu has already a SPARQL endpoint that is simply a, let's say, a very articulated search engine for robots, let's say, or for the ones among us who know how to use SPARQL. It's a bit of an advanced linked data driven language for querying data. By becoming federated, if you allow me the word, Mark, you tell me if you have a better word. You may query the data space for public procurement without even leaving data.europa.eu, or you may be doing combined searches. How cool is that? That is, you may get data from one of the data sets that you find on data.europa.eu and trying to cross it over with something that instead is is provided as data from PPDS. How do you see this scenario, Mark?
Actually, I think that is the great use of using SparkQL endpoints. What we actually did already in a kind of a proof of concept in the last year and beginning of this year was we combined the data that we used with Wikidata. And because the Wikidata is open and we can see its use as well in AI technologies a lot and for queries, we can see the huge benefit of actually using the linked data to combine in a very easy way different data sets to enrich the data. What we found out as well doing this is the restrictions that we have is in order to combine data, you need to understand how you can link the data. That was one of the problems that we faced when we have a Cohesion database is linked data is publicly available. We have Wikidata. We want to link it to the public data space. We see that certain things will not be easy to link. And that is something that we have to work on in the future to ensure that, as you said, to enrich the data that we have to bring more user or to bring more added value to the end users.
There's something also that relates to this, and it's also inspired by one of the questions of Joachim in the chat, that is, these labels we give to data spaces, how binding are they? So can the procurement data space only deal with procurement data? Shall the agriculture data space only deal with agricultural data? In most cases, it's not really like that. The idea here is that we are labeling the entity that offers themselves as the organizer or the operator of the space. But the whole idea is that actually we take down the barriers, right? What do you think, Mark, about it?
You need to, when you have a data space, the first thing is that there will be multiple data spaces, common European data spaces. And what we have to learn is when we are speaking with the other owners of a data space to see how can we actually link the data, because as you said, the agricultural database data space will be important, the manufacturing database will be important, the green data space will be important. So especially the public data space has so many links to other sectors. I think it is potentially the one that will be linked to more or less all the other data spaces. So we have to discuss with the other data owners on how can we actually link the data in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And so we have two layers in a way. We have the participants to one data space that, of course, will have to find ways to integrate with each other, and maybe easier in a way because we expect them to belong to the same kind of context, the same sector, the same industry, the same use case as in your specific situation. But then we have the layer above, that is when agriculture may want to talk to procurement, may want to talk to, I don't know, the Green Deal data space, in which case we need even a higher level of interoperability that goes beyond, let's say, the language, the ontology specific to one context. And that is what Maria Rosalia was describing earlier with this common European data space where interoperability, let's say, specifics will enable also to talk beyond those boundaries. Data.europa.eu today is already, in a way, agnostic. It publishes data by any possible sector from government, and possibly not even just government. Data.europa.eu also publishes data from entities that are not even European Union driven, and don't belong to the community. So this extra level of interoperability, and I presume that's actually my next question, a higher level of automation and trust we can put in the metadata possibly will enable really that kind of dream-like applications that today we can only imagine. To what degree do you think, Mark, that automation is actually very relevant and the quality of the metadata underneath to achieve this level of integration we've been fantasizing about?
I think this metadata or data catalogs are incredibly important. We will already have one for the PBDS itself, because we need this. We need to have meta information about how you can access specific information. But then when it comes about cross-sector or cross-region, it needs to be even more important. So those meta information is very important.
Thanks, Mark. We will get back, of course, to you later for the panel. And talking about metadata and cross-data space collaboration and integration, the thought goes, of course, to Data Spaces Support Center that Marta will explain for us. Marta, how are you today?
Very good.
So
Nice
please
to
tell
be
us, tell us about the SSC specifically, and then I will have a few questions for you as well before going to the audience.
Sure. So, so my name is Marta. Gianfranco already introduced myself, but for those who joined a bit later, so I work for at Capgemini Invent, and Capgemini is part of the consortium, which is actually rolling out the Data Space Support Center, and I'm here representing the consortium. Although Capgemini is not the leader of this consortium. So if there are very specific questions about certain work packages and tasks that I'm going to present today, giving a bit of a high-level overview, please bear with me if I cannot respond to something that immediately, and I need to get back to the different people involved in the consortium. And I believe there's also representation from the leader of the consortium here with us today. So let's move to the first slide, maybe. I will give you a bit of an overview of what is the project context. So what are we trying to do, and what is the time frame, what is the funding available? Maria Rosaria already mentioned a few things. So thanks, because this will allow me to focus on other aspects more important. I'll give you also a bit of an overview of the goals and main areas of work, what stakeholders we're targeting primarily and secondarily as part of the Data Spaces Support Center, and what are the main assets that are being developed as we speak. Next slide, please. All right. Okay. So the objective of the Data Spaces Support Center is basically to roll out or to contribute to the European strategy for data that was mentioned earlier by Maria Rosaria. How? So basically by coordinating the development of these data spaces, and in particular by fostering, the definition of requirements, technologies, processes, and standards, and different tools to ensure interoperability, not only within the data spaces, but across the data spaces and sectors themselves. This is a project that is funded by the European Commission under the Digital Europe program, has 14 million for a period of 42 months. It started, so the kickoff was in October 2022, and it will end in March 2026. So you have a bit of an overview of what is the time frame. We are 12 project partners. The consortium is run by Fraunhofer. And it's basically, it encompasses data-focused associations, also research and technology organizations, and also a representative from businesses, which in this case is Capgemini. I'm not going to go into the detail of what a data space is, because Maria Rosaria already mentioned that. I'm not going to cover either the common European data spaces, because she already covered that, but just to explain to you, or just to briefly mention that this project, as it's funded by the European Commission, it's primarily, or as a primarily target, we're going to support EU directly funded EU data spaces, okay? Mostly funded through digital, so through a Digital Europe program, also through Horizon 2020, now Horizon Europe, and other, possibly in the future, other programs of the European Commission that are supporting data space initiatives. Next slide, please. So coming a bit to what are the goals of this Data Spaces Support Center, right? There are three main goals. The first one is to create a network of stakeholders. Essentially, as I was saying, the idea is to support the creation of a community of practice in the field of data sharing, but with a focus primarily on EU-funded initiatives, knowing that, of course, there are other initiatives out there which might be a bit, have emerged at national level, and these are going to also be explored by the Data Spaces Support Center. But during this first year, the focus has been more on the ones that are funded by the EU. Second goal is to identify common requirements. What do we mean here by common requirements? We imagine defining guiding design principles, identifying standards, building blocks, open source technologies, business models, how can data spaces create value, and how can they monetize, if they wish so, their value. Also identifying barriers that are out there, and also, putting forward solutions on how these barriers can be addressed. All of this for the support of the creation of data spaces. And as you can see, all of this in a way is aimed at supporting the work of the European Data Innovation Board that is going to be launched in September this year, as Maria Rosaria mentioned, because the idea is in a way to give some tools that the EDIP can use in fostering and advising on interoperability across data spaces. And last but not least, the Data Space Support Center also aims at creating a platform for knowledge exchange, where basically all the different tools and assets that are being developed through the Data Space Support Center are made available for everyone. That includes the definition of a blueprint, good practices, templates on contract, on model contract clauses, different types of advices and knowledge that is going to be generated through this platform, this project. Next slide. This slide shows a bit what is the primary target of the Data Space Support Center, and this shows a bit in a nutshell what are the data space initiatives that we've been engaging with so far. We've been covering over the past months 11 sectors. You can easily see that there's almost a direct match between those and the common European data spaces. So we've been targeting agriculture, cultural heritage, energy, Green Deal, health, language, manufacturing, mobility, skills, smart cities and communities, and tourism. And there will be more to come. So the idea is that this is not fixed in stone. It's an evolving picture. So right now we've engaged with those which are already a bit more developed or have already started receiving funding. But the idea is to build on this and to keep on growing the network. Who are these data space initiatives, or why are we engaging with them? So the idea is to really engage with these organizations behind who are running data space initiatives, who are actually operating them through the funding received from the Commission. And we see them not only as people we're engaging with to get information from, but actually those are key contributors to the design of the assets that we are developing as part of the DSSC Data Space Support Center. So the idea is that all the products we're delivering as part of this project are co-designed with them, so that we make sure that the users actually are satisfied with the product, and the product will meet their expectations. These data space initiatives are engaged in a variety of manners. We have monthly community meetings. There are also specific workshops with them on the different assets. We have also appointed relationship managers for each of these initiatives to make sure that we have a central contact point from the consortium to the data space initiatives whenever we need to reach out to them for input on our activities. And in the future, as I was saying, the ambition is to grow this network further by adding new data space initiatives that are going to be funded, are going to emerge, not only EU funded, but possibly also national initiatives that have emerged more in a grassroots manner, but that have come a long way since they emerged. So the idea is also to be able to compare and understand the differences between common European data spaces funded by the EU and other initiatives which have emerged, sometimes led by the private sector. and also engage with other stakeholders, such as Simple in the end, that was mentioned earlier on as building block implementers. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to be very brief here because this is a myriad. This is a big slide that I could spend a lot of time on. But the idea is that this project, the Data Space Support Center, will not only engage with data spaces themselves, but also with other initiatives funded at European level that are in a way supporting data sharing in one way or another. Okay, so there might be our research and innovation projects contributing to data spaces funded through Horizon Europe, joint undertakings, cloud to edge data initiatives in the area of artificial intelligence, European digital innovation hubs, and so on. So the idea is really to bring together all the community that in one way or another is supporting data sharing. And next slide. This is possibly the most interesting part of my pitch. So the idea is here to show you a bit, to give a bit of a flair of different assets or products that we call them assets, but they're actually products or services that the Data Space Support Center is delivering. The first one is the DSSC glossary. This glossary was created as part of our project because we came to the conclusion that there were a myriad of words being used interchangeably, and sometimes it created difficulties amongst data space initiatives themselves to exactly know what we were talking about. So the idea of this glossary is to support smooth information sharing and co-development between the different data space initiatives so that everybody is on the same page whenever we're using any terminology through a common vocabulary and use of concepts. This glossary was released first in March this year, but you can see regular updates on the website as the project develops. Next to the glossary, another important asset is the starter kit. This is supposed to be an entry point to any individual organizations who either want to establish a data space initiative or they want to take part to join an existing one. And the idea is to give them a bit of an understanding of what are the requirements for creating a data space in a high-level manner, and also, most importantly, to provide them with access to a resource inventory for guidance and support. So basically, as soon as the different assets or products we're developing in the project become available, these will be linked to the starter kit so that anybody who accesses this document will have access to anything they need really to set up a data space initiative. Again, this was also released in March this year, and there are regularly updates on the website. Another asset, which is more on the technical side, is the standards and technology landscape. What is this? This is a mapping of available standards and technologies that are suitable to implement the building blocks that are being defined as part of the project. They are co-created with a community of practice, so they are co-created with the data space initiatives themselves, also with thematic groups and expert groups that have been set up as part of the DSSC. So the idea indeed is not that the DSSC produces on its own a set of or prioritizes or makes recommendations on standards and technology assets, but actually that this is done hand in hand with the community of users. And we foresee that this landscape will be published on the website of the project by the end of September. A fourth asset is the catalog of building blocks. What is this? This is a collection of existing components, one component more on the business, governance, and legal side, and another more technical component, and even the creation of new ones that will support the functionality of a data space. Again, this was also is in development right now, and the idea is the aim is to publish it by September this year. And then we come to the data space blueprint, which is really like one of the key end products of our project, which aims at being the reference guide, right? In a way to provide a comprehensive set of guidelines to support the implementation, the deployment, and also the maintenance of data space initiatives. It will contain the conceptual model of data spaces, the building blocks that are in the process of being defined, and the recommended selection of the standards and specifications which are being mapped as part of the landscape. This will be a dynamic document. So right now, the community of practice, the expert groups are working, and thematic groups are working on this asset, on the definition of the blueprint. There will be a consultation during the month of August to gather additional insights from the community. And the idea is to have a first version already in September, which will then be updated in fall and possibly in early next year. Another asset is the maturity model and the so-called data space radar. What are these? So these are tools that we are developing right now to measure and give visibility to the technical, functional, operational, business, and legal capabilities of data spaces in line with the BLOF framework. So the idea is really to measure the stage of development of data spaces, to understand where they are. So are they really in an early stage, in a more exploratory stage, preparatory stage, they're already in implementation, deployment, or even scaling, through a set of objective, let's say, indicators and measurable indicators. And this will be reflected in a visual manner in the data space radar that will be developed also in the fall. Almost closing, evaluation of data space initiatives we consider it as an important initiative, important asset of this project. And here I'm referring to one of the questions in the chat that was saying, like, how is the Commission, or how are we actually planning to measure the success or impact of data spaces? So this is exactly the product that is actually supposed to do that. So this is where Capgemini is involved. This is the task, the asset that we're leading. So we are conducting a yearly appraisal of the socioeconomic benefits or outcomes, actually, yielded by the data space initiatives that are funded by the European Commission, with a twofold purpose. As the first goal would be to inform the European Commission on the use of the funding, on whether the funding is being efficiently used, but most importantly is also to be able to provide data spaces themselves with a bit of an overview of where they stand alone, so individually, but also compared to peers, and to identify maybe pain points or improvement areas where they can learn from other data spaces which might be more advanced than them. We are releasing actually the first report, the first evaluation report, which we call it ex ante evaluation, because it won't be a fully fledged evaluation, in the sense that we're kind of testing a bit the water, seeing what is out there. The idea is that this report will provide the baseline for future evaluations, and this is going to be released in June. So it will come out very soon. So I really invite all of you to read it once it's published. At first, we'll have a bit of a review round with the Commission, and probably you can expect that this is going to be published on the website at some point over the summer, during the summer, maybe end of the summer. And last but not least, the Data Space Support Platform. This is a web-based platform. So under our website at dsa.eu, to host, grow, and curate discussions related to data spaces, and also providing access to the knowledge base, including the different assets and products that are being developed. So this is really like the idea is to assist data spaces in getting hold of the information in a fast manner, but also to gather input from data space community, and not also data space initiatives, but in general from the community on their needs. What do they need? How can the DSSC support better them, right? Because we have a list of to-do, but the idea is not just to tick boxes and develop what we're supposed to do as part of the project, but also to identify how we can be more useful to the data space community. And this was released in March, and we expect to publish a knowledge base already, first version at least of the knowledge base in September. And that's all from my side.
Thanks, Marta. That was a lot. Like,
I know.
work you're doing there. And I congratulate you also in advance for the report coming on the impact, because I have the privilege to be a reviewer of your work.
Indeed.
So I was
Indeed.
there actually yesterday night reading the last 2 chapters. So stay tuned. It will be a very interesting read. But let's go back to a couple of questions for you. And in the meantime, I would invite the other guests to come back in video. Perhaps we can take the slides off screen. A question for you, Marta, is we talked a lot about building blocks when we talk about Data Space Support Center. But it's not just technology, right? I believe we talk about process, technology, and legal. Can you explain a little more about that?
I mean, the building blocks are in the process of definition right now, and I am not the one that can give you all the updates. But what I can say is that indeed, building blocks is not just technology. From a legal perspective, for instance, the team is developing the so-called legal compass. What does it mean? They have been mapping in exhaustiveness actually the different horizontal regulations and legislation and policies which are shaping or establishing requirements on data sharing. So to help navigate data space initiatives on what are the requirements they need to comply with when they want to set up a data space. So indeed, building blocks is not just talking about technical requirements and architecture and specifications. It's also covering the governance and the legal part and the compliance part that data spaces will need to comply with. Yeah.
And that actually is an important point that reconnects with Maria Rosaria's point about the fish market. A fish market is not just the building that is the fish market. The fish market is the participants in the market, the ones that have fish to sell, the ones who go to buy fish, the ones who offer services, perhaps the logistics, the one who clean at the end of the day. So the rules by which the market works, the fact that we exchange euros instead of dollars and everything else. So a data space, remember Maria Rosaria saying this is not a data lake, that is strictly a technology platform, a tool. A data space is the combination of all these things coming together.
Correct. And ensuring that the data is shared in a trusted manner, like that the different parties can feel part of it, and that it's something decentralized, right? So it's not someone mandating how data are being shared, but it's kind of a common. It's co-designed.
And while Mark and Maria Rosaria come back on screen, because I have a question that will go also in your space. Something that Joachim in chat was asking earlier, that is, what kind of innovations we can expect. So some of these building blocks that the Data Space Support Center will select will be pre-existing. Sometimes the most common building blocks on the technology side, for example, is called the connector. It's practically a real-time translator of data from a format to another, to make it very, very simple. But I expect there will be innovation also in the way we understand working with data together in the specific context of the various data spaces. Mark, can I throw this perhaps to you? What kind of innovation do you expect for procurement coming from the experience of the future PPDS?
Innovation, I think it starts with that for the first time we will, when we have meetings with participants, we always say it will be a kind of an education exercise to work actually with data. Because in some areas like procurement, data is not commonly used. There are, of course, service providers who use the data, but there are others who just have the data, but they don't really use it. So I think one of the innovations, or one thing that we will see through the data space, is not only the procurement one, but also the others, is that people will become more aware of the importance of data. So I think that is one of the, I would even call it innovation, because it will change the way that the data providers or the data owners actually will start to provide the data. As we said, Maria Rosario said in her presentation, data quality, that the data space will provide high data quality. This very much depends on the ones who actually provide the data or who actually encode the data. I think one of the innovations is that we will see that the data will get better, that we can use, let's say, AI technologies to help to make the data better. Other innovations, but I'm not sure if I would call this innovations, is you said the connector, I think you mentioned the Eclipse connector. So that is something as well that we want to use for the procurement data space. So I think we will see a rich community to work on this open source connector to provide it more functionality, to make it more robust.
And
so I think
I believe there's a point in a way that comes through your words as well. also in doubting to use the word innovation strictly, I have a feeling that data spaces and the work the Commission is doing to promote them is indirectly also changing culture in the same way the open data program has changed culture at the beginning. So when, even before we were comfortable calling it open data, there were two public sector information directive. It took several years to get to where we are, and we can presume the same for this new wave of changing the way by which we work together over data. And on that point, actually, it reminds me of a question from Joachim in the audience that actually was asking, but what about the challenges we still have with relation to data literacy? So we know how hard it is for many of in the public still today not using, say, even just a spreadsheet effectively. I believe there are statistics from Eurostat saying that perhaps only the 14% of people over the last 3 months in general, let's say, have used advanced feature of spreadsheet. So you can even imagine how many of these will be able to use a data space connector or make a Spark query. It's useful to remind that the Data Europa Academy, that is also the host of us of this conversation today, includes lots of training from the basic to the more advanced topics, including these materials itself, will contribute to the choice and development of specific materials. But I'm wondering, for Maria Rosario in particular, what do you think we should do more, perhaps, that we are doing already? And by the way, there are also other initiatives that the Commission is responsible of, like the big data test infrastructure, for example, to promote big data in public sector. Maria Rosario, do you feel, let's say, how compelling it is to address literacy and skills? Are we late, perhaps? And I'm trying to put a difficult question to you there.
Yes, it is a bit difficult. Also because, and I want to be totally honest, unfortunately, the public sector in Europe, some countries more than others, still lag a bit behind when it comes to digitalization. So it's also, and that's not good because, of course, they can't make the best of data, of digital tools that are already available if the public sector is not equipped with the right skills. That's why the data strategy, for example, also has a chapter on enablers, in the sense that we want to promote digital skills and digital literacy. But the digital decade has the same among the targets as the making sure that not only public sector, but in citizens and business, they all become more digitalized. So this is, I think, one of the bottleneck that we still have to really address in the European Union. We need to, all of us, public sector, private sector, citizens, we need to really be equipped with the right tools, skills, knowledge to all contribute to the digital transition. We, as you said, we have a lot of initiatives, funding initiatives, policy initiatives. There is also a data space that is being developed on skills. So I think that, a lot of instruments are already out there. And member states can also use funding from the RFF or all the support that they are getting to recover from the COVID pandemic, where digital plays a huge component, and in the digital skills and literacy plays a very important role. And I see already some movement also in terms of, if we look at the curricula of the university, I see that many universities are already, let's say, modernizing the curricula to make sure that the new generation are even better equipped, so that everyone is also able to fill the gaps in the job market, because of course it's very much we need new profiles, new people equipped with that are able to also work in this sector. And digital now is in every sector, so really we can escape And I think an effort also from public sector to become to also be equipped a bit better with all these digital skills is needed, because they are crucial. So they are the ones that deliver the services and the policies to the citizens. So they have to be the first one, I would say, able to live in this new reality, to be able to deliver efficiently in this new reality.
And something
But
that I believe is, someone
sorry,
was.
no, I was just
Go
going
on,
to
Marta.
complete what Maria Rosario was saying. I think that the Commission, the European Union, is doing a lot on digital skills, and I believe there's a need indeed for digital literacy. But I would say that it's not the only bottleneck. I mean, I'm coming back from last week. I was at the My Data conference in Helsinki, and other, the data symposium that took place a couple of months ago in the Netherlands. And one of the things that keeps coming back, and I hear a lot, especially from the private sector, it's what's in it for me, right? I mean, like there's a still lack of understanding sometimes of the value of data, and there have been a lot of efforts on that. I was part of a study for DG Connect back in the years, in 2017, on the missed business opportunities that companies were facing because of lack of access to data. So the Commission has also been investing in the research from that side. But unfortunately, it seems that for many, they're a bit in a wait and see approach, right? It's like, okay, there's this data spaces thing going on there. I want to see how this unfolds before I decide to jump in, right? So I think that hand in hand with the digital literacy, which is important, I believe that there's a need for actually making more visible the benefits and the what's in it for me, for the industry, to make sure that these data spaces will fly actually and will deliver the benefits that are expected from them.
And that's part of the point about literacy, that it's not just strictly about the hardcore skills to process data. It is actually the understanding of what data can do for you. And that's part itself of the reason why, for example, in work we're doing for big data test infrastructure, we realized that some of the potential beneficiaries of EU free service to process data actually are not taking the opportunity because they are too far from even realizing how that could change their lives. And the same lives in sense of professional, let's say, professional lives. And so the element of education we need to do is not, let's say, learn the connector, is actually learn what can data sharing do for your business, learn what data sharing can do for your public administration office, and so on. In a way, the DSSC, and Marta, that was my next question for you, that is, the big slide you show with the explosion of lines going everywhere, that I usually joke with our colleagues in the DSSC about it, but it represents, in a way, that you are in a privileged space, because you can be a bit of a connector with everybody. Is the SSC going to help also, for example, the open data program, data.europa.eu, to connect to everybody else, or the two worlds are kept separate?
This is managed by one of my colleagues, so I cannot respond on behalf of him. But what I know is that we are actually engaging indeed with the different initiatives, and the idea is to put them together, to connect, to help bridge the gaps and to act as facilitators. So, but as you can see, that there are many initiatives out there. So I cannot promise that we're going to, ensure every meeting and but it is indeed in the goals of the Data Space Support Center to become a bit of a kind of the central point, right? Because we have access to these different communities, and the idea indeed is to bridge the gaps between them and to foster synergies whenever we are aware of those possibilities.
Thank you. So we want to set you free at 12:30 sharp. I see there's one last question, but I don't think there is enough time for something of that sort. I'm sorry, Joachim, we will get back to you. I would actually use, though, the 3 minutes for 1 minute each, perhaps to have just one thought, one inspirational element to motivate the audience to find out more and continue this journey we started perhaps today. I will start from Maria Rosario with the G Connect hat on. So shall we do this data spacey thing or not?
Yeah, sure. I've been working already quite a lot of years on data spaces. So yeah, sure. This is really a priority for the Commission. They play a very important role in achieving the digital transition and that is the twin transition of the green transition. So it is essential to boost data sharing, access and use in all the sectors by all stakeholders.
Thank you. Mark, what's your angle for this?
For me, the data spaces we see as a very critical instrument to be making or to help to make Europe more resilient and more effective, actually. We see that data in the domain of public procurement, I can't speak for the other domains, but for the domain of public procurement, is becoming more and more an important asset. And the initiative that was initiated by DG Connect and is supported as well from different angles from DG Connect is a very important exercise, an important project to make Europe a better place, I would say.
As simple as that, right, Mark? And Marta, please tell us what's your angle, and then a couple of slides just to close and suggesting what's coming next for the Academy.
No, from my end, I would say that, tying into what I was saying before, is that to me, the Data Space Support Center is indeed a tool to make available tools, guidance and support to make the data spaces actually ambition or program happen. But this won't happen alone if the community is not in the driving seat too. So for me, this is a call to action to everyone who is listening today here to a bit, bring forward the benefits of data sharing, be ambassadors of what can data sharing bring whenever you engage with different communities, especially I would say with the private sector. There is sometimes a bit some are less willing or a bit wary of this new change of mindset that Gianfranco was saying. And I invite you to connect to our website, to our social media channels. We have a web page on LinkedIn as well, and to share with us any questions you have, but also any advice on how we can improve and what other services are missing and that we could add to our portfolio.
Great. Thanks, Marta. Thanks to our guests. And just before you leave, a reminder for all of you to stay up to date with our activity in 2023. The next webinar will be stories of use cases. I'm hoping that I can make Europe fit for the digital age. We try to do our best to create new content for you and to, in a way, to feel more participative, and that kind of responsibility that also Marta called us to, and Mark and Maria Rosaria. It's also up to us to make this happen. Sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media. And for all of you who were with us today, thanks again for participating, for your idea, for your questions, and see you next time.